A woman named Clara knocked on Etta James's dressing room door after a concert in Birmingham, Alabama, in November of 1963, and held out an envelope when the door opened. She said, "I think this belongs to you." Etta James looked at the envelope. She recognized it. She had written it 2 years before and had never sent it and had lost it during a move and had told herself it was gone. It was not gone. Birmingham, in November of 1963, was carrying the specific weight of a city that had been at the center of something enormous and had not yet had time to settle into the aftermath. The church bombing on 16th Street had happened in September. 4 girls, a Sunday morning. The aftermath in the streets and in the faces of the people who had been there and who were still there, still in the city, still in the same churches and the same neighborhoods, continuing to be present in a place that had demonstrated what it was capable of. The city was not a neutral backdrop for a concert. It was a city where the act of assembling a crowd of black people in a venue for any purpose carried a specific weight in November of 1963 that it did not carry in other cities in other months. The performers who came to Birmingham in those months understood what they were coming to. They came anyway. The audiences understood what they were doing by gathering. They gathered anyway. The music in those rooms had a specific quality, not necessarily heavier or louder, but more necessary. More clearly the thing that music is when it is not entertainment, but survival. Etta James was 25 years old in November of 1963. She had been performing in the South since she was 17 and had developed across those years the specific doubled consciousness that black performers navigating the Chitlin circuit carried, the complete focus required for the performance, and the simultaneous awareness of every variable in the room and the building and the street outside that was not the music. She knew how to hold both at the same time. She had learned this the way she had learned everything about performing, not from instruction, but from repeated exposure to the reality of what the South required of a young black woman traveling through it with a band and a set of equipment and a schedule that did not always account for every version of what could go wrong. The concert in Birmingham was in a club on 4th Avenue North, the heart of the black commercial district, a street that had its own specific history of music and business and resistance, a street where the ordinary life of the black community had continued and continued and continued through everything the city had done and was doing. She performed for 2 hours. The room was full. The room was the way Birmingham rooms were in those months, completely present, giving the music something she had not felt in the same way in other cities. As if the audience understood that the music was one of the things holding the room together, and that they were all holding it together by being there. She gave them everything the room asked for. When she came off the stage, she was exhausted in the specific way of a performance that required not just physical and musical effort, but the full weight of a person who understood where she was and what it meant to be there. She was in the dressing room changing when the knock came. She said, "Come in." The door opened, and a woman stood in the frame, a woman she did not recognize, somewhere in her 30s, wearing a church dress and a coat, holding an envelope in both hands. The envelope was sealed and addressed in handwriting that Etta James recognized before she could have named why. It was her own. The woman said, "I'm sorry to bother you," she said. "I found this at a rooming house in Tuscaloosa last year, and I have been trying to find you since." She held out the envelope. Etta James did not move for a moment. She looked at the envelope. She had written it in the spring of 1961, had written it on a night when she needed to say something that the music could not hold, to a person she had not spoken to in years, in language that was not the language of a performance or an interview, but the language of someone sitting alone with the full weight of what they were carrying, and the specific relief of putting it in sentences, even if no one would ever read them. She had written it and addressed it and sealed it, and had not sent it. Had decided, after carrying it for several days, that the sending was not the right thing, that the letter was for her and not for the person it was addressed to, that what she had needed was the writing and not the delivery. She had put it in a box. The box had moved with her when she moved, and somewhere in the move, she had told herself, it had been lost. She had told herself it was lost because she preferred that to the alternative explanation, which was that she had left it somewhere, in a rooming house in Tuscaloosa on a tour stop in early 1962, and that it had been sitting in a room she was not in for the past year and a half, while she was in other rooms, being other versions of herself. She took the envelope from Clara's hands. She said, "How did you find me?" Clara said, "I asked at every venue in Alabama." She said, "It is taken since last spring." She said, "I did not open it." She said, "It was sealed and addressed, and I could see it was yours, and I did not think it was mine to open." Etta James looked at her. She said, "You kept a letter for a year and a half and did not open it." Clara said, "It was not mine to open." The specific quality of that statement, the simplicity of it, the complete absence of virtue signaling in the delivery, just a statement of a principle that Clara had applied without expecting to be thanked for it, settled in the room in a way that Etta James later described as one of the more striking things she had heard in a dressing room. Not dramatic, not a performance of good character, just a fact. It was not mine to open. Etta James held the envelope in her hands for a moment. She said, "Sit down." Clara sat. Etta James sat in the chair at the mirror. She looked at the envelope. The address on the front was in her own handwriting, and the name was the name she had written, and the seal was unbroken, and the letter inside was, as far as she knew, exactly what she had put in it on a spring night in 1961, the full, unguarded version of something she had needed to say and had decided not to send. She said to Clara, "Do you want to know what is in it?" Clara said, "Only if you want to tell me." Etta James said, "I do not know yet." She set the envelope on the counter. She looked at it. She said, "I spent 2 years telling myself I had lost it." Clara said, "I know. You were not hard to find. You just were not looking to be found in this particular way." They sat in the dressing room together for another 20 minutes. Etta James asked Clara about herself, who she was, how she had come to be in the rooming house in Tuscaloosa, what her life was in Birmingham in November of 1963. Clara told her. She was a teacher. She taught at one of the schools on the east side. She had been at 16th Street Baptist that September and was still working out what it meant to continue, what it meant to go back to school on Monday after what had happened on Sunday. She said, "The music helps." She said, "That is why I came tonight." She said, "And I have had this for a year and a half." When Clara left, Etta James sat alone at the mirror with the envelope in front of her. She did not open it that night. She put it in her bag. She carried it for several more months. She said once, years later, without elaborating on the specific occasion, she said, "There are letters you write for yourself that accidentally go out into the world and come back to you changed. Not in content. The content is what you wrote, but in weight. The letter that comes back from a year in a stranger's possession is not the same letter you sealed. It has been held by someone who did not open it out of a principle you would not have thought to apply to yourself. It comes back heavier. And the weight is not a burden. It is the weight of being treated with more care than you were treating yourself." Birmingham in 1963 was a city that understood something about holding things carefully that most cities learn only in the aftermath of catastrophe. What had happened on 16th Street in September had not made the city fragile. It had made the people in it more careful, more deliberate about the things they held on to and the things they let go. Clara had learned something in the months between finding the envelope and finding Etta James that had nothing to do with the envelope specifically. That the act of keeping something intact, of carrying it without opening it, without interpreting it, without making it yours when it is not yours, that this act is itself a form of care that the world does not often reward and does not often name. She had done it anyway. She carried the envelope for a long time. Whether she opened it or not, she never said. What she said was that the concert in Birmingham that November was one of the ones she thought about when she was asked what performing in the South had meant during the civil rights years. She said, "You go into those rooms knowing what the city has done, and you look at the people in the seats, and you understand that they came out tonight because the music is one of the things that is still theirs, and you give it to them completely because it is the only thing you have that is equal to what they brought into the room." She said, "The music in those rooms in those years was not entertainment. It was evidence. Evidence that something could not be taken away." What she said was also that she stopped losing things on purpose after that night, that the specific experience of having something she had tried to leave behind come back to her, held intact by a woman who had looked for her across the state of Alabama for a year and a half, out of a principle as simple as it was not mine to open, changed the way she thought about the things she was carrying. You do not always get to decide what stays lost. Sometimes the things you left come back, held carefully by people who understood that they were not theirs to open. Subscribe to Etta James, The Untold Stories. Every day we find the rooms behind the music, the conversations nobody recorded, the moments that made everything else possible. The comment section is open. Tell us which story you want us to find next. If this one stayed with you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today.